Welcome everyone to another edition of Play It Through, and on this edition it's Big Nose Freaks Out, brought to us by Codemasters in Camerica. The sequel to the original Big Nose the Caveman features the protagonist of, well, Big Nose, this time featuring a new invention of his, the wheel. And the wheel is attached to a board that he uses kind of like a skateboard as he travels along each level, taking out different dinosaur-themed enemies while he's all trying to get back his stash of bones. Big Nose Freaks Out was actually released twice for the NES, once as an actual original NES cart, and then also as a specialty cart for the Aladdin Deck Enhancer, which was a special product put out by Codemasters and Camerica in order to easily bypass the NES lockout chip a lot more effectively. Instead of having to put a lockout chip in each individual cart, they could put it in the Aladdin Deck Enhancer and allow the carts to not cost as much to make. But here we go with Big Nose Freaks Out for the NES. As the game starts up, you see Big Nose carrying his stash of bones to the bank, and then he ends up being bombarded and his bones end up being stolen. You can then play the game 1 or 2 players taking turns, or a 2-player competitive mode against one another. Then you move on to the first level of the game, the Freaky Forest. Now, if you play the original Big Nose the Caveman, you'll notice a lot of differences here. Big Nose is actually a lot smaller overall on screen, there's a lot more going on, and overall the graphics are definitely improved, being a little bit more colorful. The music throughout the game is still catchy and fun, as well as the overall gameplay is actually pretty interesting. Being able to control a caveman on a skateboard-like device is something that you don't see in any other game available for the NES. And the game actually works pretty well. All the flip jumping and momentum that's needed in order to get over different platforms and things throughout the game make the game not only fun, but also different from other titles. The core gameplay, though, of Big Nose stays the same, of controlling, of course, the caveman Big Nose, using his club to take out enemies, and then picking up rock power-ups in order to enhance the club and rock throwing. Every time you pick up another set of rocks, you're able to throw out another rock with each of your club swings. Whenever you get hit, though, you go back to the default club-only swing, but you can have a maximum of 3 rocks being thrown every time you swing the club. You'll use this in order to take out all the enemies throughout the game, including the many boss characters that you fight at the end of each of the worlds. You'll also notice that the game goes very well with the overall theme of being on a skateboard. You'll have all these different rail-like systems set up on all the different platforms that you're jumping around in order to actually make it from one end of the level to the other, making it to the goals. Because of this, there's actually sometimes different branching paths that you can take in each of the levels. And because of this, there isn't sometimes one direct path to take. But don't worry, I'll be taking at least the best path I was able to find throughout. There's also a few levels that can be definitely tricky and lead you into dead ends, so you'll have to backtrack and find the right openings that you can actually travel up in order to make it through some of the harder levels of the game. The jumping and platforming works extremely well in Big Nose Freaks Out. The only thing you'll have to really get used to is the momentum system. Using that in order to move up and down the rails, going down ramps or going up ramps, slowing or making you go faster, will allow you to, of course, make longer or shorter jumps. Thankfully, while trying to explain everything that's going on in the game, the first levels are pretty straightforward, introducing you to the rail system in the game as far as the platforming is concerned, and introducing you to the basic types of enemies. While each world does feature its own unique types of enemies, overall though they have kind of the same patterns, and you'll learn them as you go through. You'll have standing plant enemies and then enemies that move pretty slowly towards you. You'll also have some flying enemies to deal with as well. One thing that definitely takes some getting used to, though, is the actual club swinging. When you jump in the air, the direction that you end up swinging the club and throwing the rocks varies depending upon how long of a jump and where you are in the spin cycle of the jump. At the end of each world, you'll meet a boss character. For example, the first one is a Stegosaurus. On top of the Stegosaurus is the main antagonist of the game, the green dinosaur. For the first boss, though, it's pretty standard fare, as you'll stay on the left side of the screen, jumping in between the fireballs that the small dinosaur throws out, while keep launching your rocks at him. You'll thankfully have a health bar at the bottom of the screen to tell when he's gotten low on health, and after about 7 or so hits, you'll be able to take him out and move on to the bonus level. The bonus level takes place in between each of the worlds and involves you bouncing on top of mushrooms, making it over giant gaps in order to make it to the end. If you're able to do so, you're rewarded with a continue. You then go back to the level selection screen and you automatically travel to the next level. Unfortunately, you're not able to choose what level you go to next. Colossal Caverns is the second world of Big Nose Freaks Out, and this is where things start to get a little bit more hectic and definitely take a little bit more getting used to. This is where you'll start to find yourself running into some dead ends, and one of the more interesting aspects is the jumping that I'm doing right here. There's 2 times in the game specifically where you'll have to do these kind of weird jumping where you're actually jumping on nothing, but holding in the jump button will allow you to keep jumping up in the air higher and higher to get to some of these hidden places so you can actually continue on the level. I need to do it here, and there's another level later on where you'll be bouncing on invisible objects in order to build yourself up in order to get to a higher platform. This level, of course, does introduce some new enemies. However, the enemies are pretty much the same types that we're going to be seeing throughout the entire game. At this point also, you'll pretty much be getting used to all the rail jumping throughout the game, so you'll have no problem being able to figure out what jumps you can and can't make, sliding back and forth and up and down all the different variant ramps depending upon where you want to go, and make your way through the different levels. Every level also contains a certain amount of bones, and you actually at the end of each level get a counter for how many bones you actually found, how many there was in the level, and then how many you missed. I'm not sure exactly what, if anything, happens if you're able to actually obtain all the bones in a level. While traveling quickly through each of the levels, in some of the levels you can get some really good speed going on some of the ramps, you also have to be careful because there are pits to be located in levels, and of course also going too fast you may accidentally run into enemies. Always have your finger ready though to swing that club so you can take out any enemy. Even if you're unable to hit a guy with a rock, if you're just moving quickly and swinging at the right time, you'll still be able to hit a guy even if you're about to run directly into him. Located in some of the pits, you'll actually find hidden bonus levels that'll trigger. Sometimes you'll just be moving quickly along a platform and all of a sudden trigger one of these little bonus levels. These levels basically are just little add-ons that you can get some extra items within. Usually though, I'm unable to figure out exactly where to go and I just kind of wander through them until I eventually fall off the edges and exit back out to where I left off in the actual main level. Like I said, there's multiple different paths in some of the levels to take, so the path I take may not necessarily be the best or quickest, but it was the way I was able to at least figure out the levels for myself. And even then, when I'm playing the game a couple of times, I still get lost, I still get confused sometimes, and have to backtrack in order to get to the correct platforms. Here, when you go up, you won't be able to go directly vertically, but you'll have to backtrack a little bit doing a big jump over to the left in order to land on the platform. Sometimes backtracking is going to be the only way you'll be able to find the actual correct path that you need to take in each of the levels. Going down the vertical drops as well as some of the ramps can actually be really fun in the game. Even though Sonic the Hedgehog had already been well released before the release of this title, this one does remind me of that, and I can definitely see some influence from that title. Here, unfortunately, I need to actually back travel a little bit and work my way up these ramps in order to actually make it to the correct path. At any point if you see a sitting mushroom, you can actually bounce on it, usually getting some extra bones while doing so. You can also sometimes bounce on the same mushroom multiple times in order to get multiple bones. At the beginning of the next level, make the big jump and then enter inside the tube to head down. There's a lot of these different tubes throughout the game, and you'll have to choose the correct ones at times in order to make it to the right areas. There's one level in particular where there's like 4 or 5 of them, and in the end you're actually ignoring most of them in order to actually make it to the correct path. Right here I end up entering one of those bonus levels I mentioned earlier. Like I said before with these, I usually end up not really finding anywhere specific to go in them, so I usually try to just exit out of them quickly and get back to the actual main level. Another little funny tidbit about the game is there's actually a weird code. While there's a standard 99 lives code you can enter, there's also a code that actually allows Big Nose to have a bigger nose. Why necessarily you would want to give him that is really beyond me, but it's one of those little funny things about the game. After completing the level, we move on to the actual boss level of world number 2. For this boss, we start off on the center platform. Start off by immediately swinging over to the right to hit the dinosaur. He will pop out of the left and right walls, alternating where he pops out of, and fire a fireball at you. You'll have to jump over this while also jumping over the fireballs that are thrown out from the little dinosaur, who is nicely planted on the top right platform. Sometimes it can be difficult to hit the dinosaur if he's on the bottom platforms, because the rocks somehow, even though while hitting him directly, will actually just go through him and not damage him. Thankfully though, the battle is not too difficult as long as you're able to get the jumping under control on that center platform, and once you deliver the final hit to the dinosaur, you move on to the next level. The little bonus levels are actually one of my favorite things about the game, trying to figure out the best way to bounce and using the momentum in your favor to make sure that you land safely on the next mushroom in order to make it all the way over to the far right screen. The next level is the Funky Factory. Now this world is the toughest I think overall in the game as far as navigating goes. There's a lot of dead ends in these levels and you'll have to find the actual direct and correct path in order to get through these. It starts off rather easy and plain, but you'll soon have some moving platforms. You'll have to watch out for the drills coming out of the ground consistently at different spots, as well as actually not just running in the dead ends constantly in order to figure out each one of these stages. Here, for example, I run into one of those dead ends and actually had to backtrack a little bit in order to get on the correct path. Along some of the platforms in these levels is conveyor belts, so you'll have to be careful of those. Thankfully, they're nice and bright orange, so you can definitely tell them apart from normal platforms, but you'll still have to be careful, especially when you're moving fast down some of the slopes. Be very careful on this part right here by the end of the level because there's a lot of pterodactyls flying around, so have your club ready. At the very end of that big ramp, we make it to the next level. At the beginning here, for some extra bones as well as some points, you can climb up using the moving platforms and then move along these small platforms in order to get into the upper right, where you can find some bonus mushrooms. Once dealing with that though, drop down, avoiding some of the screws that are popping up and down, as well as a rat and a moving up and down gear. These gears thankfully are pretty easy to get past because they bounce pretty slowly. Once you make it over to the right though, use the tube in order to start making your way up. While this level won't be as bad as the next level we're about to go to, this one can get a little bit confusing. For example, here you actually have to go through the open area between the two ramps in order to make it across. Be very careful though once you get past that area though, because you'll have to make some big jumps, including landing on a moving platform, in order to avoid falling down to the pit below. Continue along the level and drop down. You can actually enter the wall here on the right side in order to grab some extra bones. Then, in order to get past here, what you'll have to do is time it correctly so you can land on the mushroom, bounce off of it, and then land safely on the bottom below, and then move over to the left. Once again, avoiding any of the screws that are bouncing and coming out of the ground themselves. Once down though, watch out for a pterodactyl, and then make your way along the last bit of ramp before you make it to the exit. The beginning of the next level can be a little bit tricky. Enter the first tube that you end up finding, and when you travel over to the right, you'll enter another one of those secret bonus areas. Once back out of this area though, go back over to the left and go up that first tube once again. For some reason, exiting out of the bonus level will actually put you down below. If you travel over to the right like I do here, you'll end up running into a dead end. Like I said, this area is definitely confusing and probably the worst level overall in the game as far as actually finding where you're supposed to go. Over here on the right side, go through the tube on the right. You'll drop down to the area below. Traveling all the way over to the right though, it will once again run into a dead end. However, what you'll have to do is instead use the tube and then travel along the up and down moving platform here in order to actually access the ramp or rail that you need to in order to actually move on. This took me a few minutes definitely to find the first time, and even after playing the game a couple of times, I forgot that that's exactly what I was supposed to do when I made it back here. Up here, what you'll have to do is pop into the tube, and then when you pop out the top, hold the right button so that you can actually land on the platform over to the right. This way you'll land safely and be able to travel up past some screws in order to continue on. Here, drop down and hug the right area so you can land easily on the rail and then continue through the level. Thankfully the level is not too long, but just trying to actually figure out where you were supposed to go makes the level a challenge. We then move on to the next level of Funky Factory, and that's level number 12 overall in the game. It starts off with a conveyor belt and an up and down moving screw, and then you'll make a quick jump over the ramp to the right. Thankfully this level isn't as challenging as the previous one as far as actually figuring out where you're supposed to go. Enter inside this tube here, you'll travel pretty far up and land on this platform, take out a couple of rat enemies, and continue over to the right. Drop down to the gap between these two platforms in order to make it over here and enter another big tube. Once you enter the tube, you'll be on top of the area and continue over to the right past some more enemies. Sometimes you have to do some jumping and maneuvering in order to actually get momentum to move up some of the rails. At the very bottom though, move onto the conveyor belt, pass a couple of more screws, and exit the level in order to make it to the boss level. For the boss, the evil green dinosaur is actually riding on a giant pink dinosaur. The pink dinosaur will fire a fireball at you, as well as the little guy will also throw projectiles at you. Thankfully this battle is extremely easy and a lot easier than the previous boss that we just fought. Keep firing rocks at him consistently, dodging in between the fireballs that thankfully don't come at you too quickly, and you should easily be able to take out this boss. Once he's done, we move on to the next bonus level. Take your time while bouncing along the mushrooms, if possible making it to the end so you can grab yourself another continue. Next up is the fourth world of the game, Terror Town, and as its name states, it's a town-based level. There's also water in this level for the first time in the game. Thankfully you don't drown in the game by hitting and going underneath the water, however you do turn white, interestingly enough, and of course do move slower throughout. While there is seemingly a lot more going on in this level as far as enemies go, the level ends up being easier since it's a lot easier to navigate. After climbing up some of these buildings, I realized that I wouldn't be able to actually continue over to the right. Instead, I was actually supposed to drop down into the water below, take out a couple fish enemies, and continue over. After a few more enemies and a couple of more ramps, we'll safely be out in the open once again, jump over a few more enemies, and make it to the end of the first level of Terror Town. The second level is more of the same. There's a bunch of enemies, as well as you'll actually have to climb up some of the buildings in this level at the beginning in order to make it safely to the next platform that you need to go to. Since this level ends up being a lot easier than the previous one, your main concern of course is just, well, surviving the actual enemies, as you won't have to deal with too many tricky platforms and too many dead ends. In this area you'll have a big open town segment, but don't worry about climbing up any of the buildings, instead just go right down to the bottom and head over to the right. Once inside here you'll have to traverse your way around some of the ramps inside of the cave itself, eventually making it over to the right here again, and exiting out of the stage once you make it into another big town area. This next level ends up being actually pretty short to travel through. Start off in a big town segment, climb up these guys right here at the end, and go through the opening. There will be some pterodactyl-like enemies waiting for you inside the cave like always, but just work past them and travel down. Drop down this big hole on the far right side instead of trying to travel upwards, and you'll be on the correct path here. After you make it past some fish enemies, you'll be in another town segment. Watch out for the townspeople moving back and forth and climb up some of the buildings. After making it to the top of the buildings, you'll be able to enter another cave-like segment on the far right. Just make a big jump inside. Once here, just travel along down to the bottom and you'll be able to easily complete the rest of the level. Next up is the final level of Terror Town. Start off by immediately dropping into the water below. Once you pop out of the water, just make your way around. You'll have to travel around a whole bunch of different ramps, but there's no branching paths during the segment, and eventually you'll be able to get outside into another town segment. Once you're outside here, take out the cavemen and then climb up all the buildings. You'll easily see another platform on the far right here, so go over there. Don't drop down the first hole, instead drop down the second one. Once outside once again, you'll just have to climb some more buildings and repeat the process by going up into the upper right and going onto this platform. However, this time around, you want to drop into the first hole that you see. In fact, that's the only one that's located on that platform this time around. Once back inside one of the cave areas, just travel along, eventually make it to the bottom, and once you make it all the way over, you'll complete the level. After getting out of the water and completing the stage, it's time to move on to the boss level of Terror Town. Now for this boss, the little dinosaur is riding a giant catapult. Hang off on the left side of the screen, jumping every once in a while when the catapult gets close enough to launch one of the fireballs close enough to you. However, for the most part, he'll just consistently miss with both his projectiles and the catapult's weapon, so just keep firing rocks and drain that health really quick. After grabbing ourselves one more continue from the previous level, we now move on to Murder Mountain in level 17, the final levels of Big Nose Freaks Out. Now being the final levels, you can definitely expect the enemies, well, to be a little bit tougher than some of the previous ones. But don't worry, they're not really that much tougher. You'll have to watch out for the pterodactyls like normal, however the pterodactyls in this level can drop eggs on you. This will be a little bit extra trouble that you'll have to watch out for while traveling along the rails. There's also large monkey enemies that both walk on the ground, as well as actually climb along the rails as well, so be careful when moving along a rail that you don't end up being grabbed by one of the monkeys on the rail itself. Besides them, you'll also have some little pink dinosaurs that really aren't too much trouble, but they do move a little bit quickly, so they can sometimes get in the way. The first level for Murder Mountain is more about the actual enemies than any kind of confusing map. You'll easily be able to just travel through it as it's really straightforward. Only here do I have to worry about actually getting to the top platform to actually make it over. After a pretty long journey and tons of enemies, we finally make it to the end of the first level of Murder Mountain. The next level is a little bit different. You start off with some big rails that you'll have to travel quickly along so you have enough momentum to get across a big gap. Then enter inside the cave on the far right and you'll land on top of the platform up here. Once up here, just start traveling over to the right, ignoring the other caves that you may see. I was actually able to get an invincibility for the first time in the game, and as you can notice that Big Nose is actually flashing, allowing me to easily run through all enemies I may come in contact with. You can climb up these stair-like platforms on the right, making it to the top so you can actually make it over to here. Ride the rail all the way down and make another big jump, and complete the last bit of rail in order to beat the level. For the next level, start off by traveling up the rail and do a big jump so you can make it over the pterodactyl. Here, over the next gap, I end up finding one of those bonus levels again. Once I get past that bonus level and back out into the main stage, I continue my way over right. Over here, though, drop down in order to enter this tube down here so you can make it all the way to this top area. Be sure to hit the club right away so you can take out the two enemies that are right there when you come out of the tunnel. This level ends up being rather short though, as long as you entered the right tubes, as we've already made it to the end. It's now time for the final level of the game, and you start off by bouncing on invisible platforms, and you do this twice in a row. It's really weird, but you'll have to do it in order to make your way up to the platforms above so you can actually continue on the level. This definitely took a few minutes to realize that that's what I was supposed to do here. Once you made it past that little beginning part though, the level gets a little bit easier. Over here on the far right there, you can once again bounce on some invisible walls here in order to make it to the rail up here. Then once on the rails, don't go up here, instead head over to the left. Make a big jump over so you can actually land safely, watching out for some monkeys along the rails as you do so. Keep sliding along the rails and eventually you'll make it to a dead end here on the left, allowing you to climb up on the platforms to make it to the next set of rails slightly above the ones you were on. Then travel up some more until you're on the very top of the level. Once up here, there's a lot of enemies coming at you, so be careful. Make a big jump at the end, and if you're lucky, you'll be able to land on the invisible platform and bounce safely to the platform on the right. Once here, just continue all the way over until eventually you'll make it to the end of the level. Once you've done that, travel along the rails. You'll eventually make it here and pretty much at a dead end. However, what you actually have to do is find a mushroom on the far left. On the far left side, you'll see a single terry mushroom. Bouncing on top of it will actually teleport you to another part of the stage. Once here, this is actually where we need to go in order to make it through the last little bit and complete the level itself. It's now time for the final boss, and the final boss is, well, the little green dinosaur riding in a balloon. He fires two projectiles at you that come at you pretty quickly but are easily able to be jumped over, so just keep firing those rocks even though he hovers back and forth. Sometimes the rocks will miss even though they go actually through the balloon itself, but once you've delivered enough hits you'll drain his health and can enjoy the short ending, the Big Nose freaks out. So there you have it, Big Nose gets his bones back and he's able to finally cash them into the bank. The game then instantly resets to the Freaky Forest and you can play the game all over again. However, that's going to wrap up this edition of Play It Through. I'd like to thank you for watching and of course, I hope you enjoyed.